Hello, everyone. I have Maryam with me. She is a Muslim parenting coach and speaker. She supports Black and brown moms to parent consciously, heal, and break generational cycles. Thank you, Maryam, so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really, really excited for this discussion. I think it's so important and much needed.
Yeah. Now, before we delve into anything technical, let's just go with the basics, okay? What is toxic parenting?
Oh, okay. Toxic parenting is not the odd, and I have to say this, it's not the odd shouting that you do to your child, because we all do it. That's not what it is. Toxic parenting is repetitive, constant. So if you're constantly shouting and screaming, if you are constantly criticizing, if you are aggressively controlling, that's toxic parenting. That has a harmful effect psychologically, emotionally on your child. And this can be something that's interesting. It can be unintentional. A majority of the time, it probably is unintentional. We don't realize we're doing it. Yeah. But it's very important to become conscious of it, because it's not something any of us want to do, inshallah.
So how does this, now I'll further break it down, how does this relate specifically to Black and brown moms?
Okay, so a question that I always ask in any of my speaking engagements, when I ask my audience, what was your experience of growing up in an ethnic or Black and brown household? I'm sure you can only imagine some of the answers that I get, and I'll just give you a few examples. Very controlling, strict, had no voice, had no choice, etc., etc. Now, whilst there are positive answers, unfortunately, I cannot sugarcoat it, and the majority of them are negative. And this is something that I'm so passionate about, to change the narrative, the stereotype of growing up in an ethnic household, because a lot of the things that have been normalized. So you asked, what does toxic parenting look like in a Black and brown household? It will just be shouting, being beaten, being hit. And this is something that we don't even flinch. You go into an ethnic community and you say, yeah, I was hit as a child. Don't you remember Mom used to chuck a slipper at us?
We joke about it.
We joke about it and laugh, and I'm very guilty of laughing as well, because I think it's part of our coping mechanism, but deep down we know how wrong and how toxic that really is. Just a disclaimer before we move on. So a lot of the work I do is surrounding within our ethnic communities, and whilst there is a lot of unhealthy things that have seeped into what our culture is, and I'm sure I'll talk about that, there are also lots of beautiful parts. I don't want to sit here and for the audience or anyone who's listening to think, oh gosh, here, Maryam's just bashing our culture. No, there are beautiful parts of our culture that we can pass on to our children as generational strength. But unfortunately, we cannot no longer afford to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that the toxic element does not exist, because it absolutely does. And we hold the power to change that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I love how you mentioned about that's a coping mechanism. When we joke about it, that's a coping mechanism. That's so interesting. Now, how does this have an impact on how we raise our children? Like, how does our toxic behaviors as parents, because eventually what happens, Maryam, is whether we like it or not, we become like our parents. Yes. And like you said, we don't realize it. Unconsciously, we do the same things our parents did without realizing it. Even though we grew up in a different generation, we still end up repeating that cycle. And so how does this have an impact on a child's development?
That's a really important question, Farah. And I think the reason why we do that, and full disclaimer, I did that many, many years ago. And this is why I, come and speak about these things. A lot of it is to do with the cultural conditioning. That's what's causing us to repeat the cycles. So the way that it impacts a child, emotionally, psychologically, let's just take one example of their self-esteem. The mental health and the self-esteem of Black and brown children is absolutely destroyed by this toxic parenting. The lack of trust that they now have with the parent, the attachment issues they may have, the ability to do well at school. It impacts so many different areas of their life, being able to express themselves emotionally, whether they even know how to do that, being able to build healthy relationships. You know, subhanAllah, something that's so profound is when you receive this type of tough love, we like to call it, you know,
Yes.
that discipline, we like to call it in our homes. You then internalize as a child that this is what love is. The person who loves me hurts me. And this is something that we don't realize, that we are building up our children very unconsciously to accept this as a form of love. And no sugarcoating here. And this can mean that our children later on in their later adult relationships will put up with abuse because they think, oh, well, this is love, isn't it? Because they're doing this because they love me.
Yes. Yes, and this constant need that children have, that I have to do something, I have to achieve something to be loved and valued in this house. So if my grades aren't good enough, or if I, don't do something properly, I will not be loved by my parents. So they always live in this fear. And like you said, been there, done that. I've gone through that, where I've done these things to my children as well, unconsciously, of course. And I've had one of my kids, I remember, mention that, oh, does this mean you don't love me? The fact that he said that just made me think that how I'm giving out my love to my children, and made me rethink that. So it's very interesting. Now, for a child on the spectrum, okay, at the end of the day, they are children as well first, and then they have their labels.
Yes.
And usually when I have moms calling me, they are busy telling me about how they can, asking me questions rather, on how they can fix their child. So I would imagine that, together with all the toxic parenting baggage that we have, and this constant need to fix this broken child, I'm just trying to think about how negatively that works for that child, because that child knows that he's different. I mean, a lot of people think that children on the spectrum are completely unaware of their surrounding, which is not true. They know what's going on around them. They know they're treated differently. So when a parent is behaving this way, I mean, I'm just thinking for a nonverbal child, what that would mean.
They know. Children know. And whether or not they can make sense of it, they definitely know. And you definitely see the effects of that. Even primary school children, even as they grow older, it's not necessarily when they become teenagers or adults. Children know that they are being treated in such a way, because you may not realize it, but like that example that you gave, I think a lot of us will come to realize that our children then have this notion of, well, mama only loves me when I behave like this, or she only loves me when I get good grades, or she only likes me, and therefore I have to become this version of myself to receive that particular love from her. I'm sure many of us can relate to that growing up. I know I definitely could, right? What you touched on, the academic side, is so important, because I really like to talk about this, that this whole conversation we're having about toxic parenting, and is this part of, ethnic cultures, and where did this come from? If you take it back, let's go back 70, 80 plus years, and wherever back home is for any of us, be it, if it's in Asia, if it's in Africa, wherever it is, we did not parent like this. So a lot of things that have been normalized inside our culture actually came from colonization, our communities being destroyed. Again, that's all coping mechanisms, that's all learned behavior. But back to your question, children know. They absolutely do know.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about therapies that are in place that strictly follow this system of reward-based learning. You ask for something appropriately, I'll reward you. You sit down on your chair, I'm going to reward you. So it's all based on this system that it's a give and take sort of situation.
Yes.
And it works fantastically well with our ethnic households. It's true, because in the West now, they have all these other approaches where they are looking into how forming relationships is crucial to working with a child. But in our ethnic households, Asian households particularly, we are more about how can I get the child to sit and start working, start
Yeah.
delivering their academic goals.
And there's a reason for that, though. There's a reason why our parents were so fixed on academic success, because when you've come from back home, their priority was survival.
Yes.
Correct? So
Yeah.
their priority was having food on the table, having a roof over your head. So we're not saying the harmful effects don't exist. Oh, absolutely they do. But to understand your family history as to why that was such a drive, and now, alhamdulillah, I'd like to think that a lot of us are now in that privilege where we're not operating out of that survival mode, but we are unconsciously still repeating those patterns, and that's why it becomes toxic. So when you give yourself permission to question, say, hey, why am I like pressuring so much with the academics? Why do I want them to sit still? Give yourself the permission to just question. That within itself, that awareness within itself will help you to disrupt some of the patterns. And of course, with practice.
Yes, and that's exactly what you mean when you say conscious parenting. What advice would you give someone who wants to change this, who wants to, I think you probably might have already answered that when you said that, you have to be conscious with what you're saying and how often you're saying it. And maybe cue into how your child is responding as well, because sometimes you get your clues there as well. It makes you think as a parent that maybe I'm pushing all his buttons or her buttons, and that's why they're responding in a certain way. Do you have any more thoughts on that?
I would say validate the younger version of yourself, because you know what that feels like. You know exactly what it feels like to be criticized, to be controlled, to be shamed, pressure. You know exactly what it feels like. And I know I definitely did, and I'm sure you can resonate as well. When you start validating that younger version of yourself, how many of us as parents have had thoughts, oh my God, I would never speak to my mom like that. How dare you? And it's running in our minds, right? And my one question, just for everyone that's listening, I speak to a lot of moms who say, oh my gosh, my child's so disrespectful. They don't listen to me. What's wrong with kids these days? One question, and I'm not saying kids aren't disrespectful. Absolutely, there are children who are disrespectful. But my question would be, is your child disrespectful, or were you never allowed to say no as a child? Just one question.
Oh, you're never allowed to say, oh, okay.
So is it that they're actually disrespectful, or are they voicing an opinion? Are they disagreeing in a respectful manner and you just don't like it because you wasn't able to do that as a child? So that's where the first point of validating that younger version of yourself. Secondly, obviously what I said about just giving yourself permission to question what you've accepted as what's normal. This is the way that we've always done things, and this is the way that we're going to continue to do them. Third thing, first and foremost, as Muslims, I think it's very important that we know that we raise our children for the sake of Allah. They are an amana and they are a gift that's given to us by Allah. So are we parenting for the long term, or are we parenting for the short term? If we're parenting for the short term, shouting works. So easy. Screaming them, that works. It's so easy because it stops the behavior then and now. But my question is, and this is no way, shape, or form in shaming any of us, this is an invitation to myself as well, that in 10, 15 years' time, let's be real, when your children have the capacity to choose whether they want to spend time with you, what's going to happen? When they have the capacity to choose whether they want to have that close relationship with you, what's going to happen? Because now more than ever in the times that we live in, it's so important to hold on to our children. And constantly punishing, criticizing, and shouting and screaming at them is actually doing the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. We want to influence them. We want to hold them. We want to be the compass point for our children.
We want to be the safe space for them. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's not going to happen if we're honest with ourselves. It's not going to happen if we don't start unlearning a lot of this cultural conditioning. It's not easy. Yeah. It's not. But the future generations will thank you for it, inshallah, and your reward is with Allah.
I just remembered an example now when you mention about, have we ever said no to our parents? Because children on the autism spectrum struggle with making choices. And
Yes.
it's so important for us to teach our children to make choices, and for
Yes.
us then to be able to understand and support that choice, right? If we have taught them how
Mhm.
to make those choices. Now, when I work with my son Suleiman, who's on the spectrum, autism spectrum, I had to teach him how to make choices, but I wasn't really allowing him to make those choices.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what would happen is he would make the choice he knew I would be happy with.
Yes.
Now that
Yes.
he's
Yes.
a teenager, even though he has limited, verbal skills, he will make the choice that he wants. He believes will make his mom happy, but then he's not happy with it, and I can see it in his body language that he said yes
Yes.
because I know mom wants me to say yes, but then he'll start rocking, he'll start flapping, and then I'll be like, it's okay if you don't want to do it. You don't have to say yes just because I want you to say yes. And that's
Yes.
been a bit tough for me.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's just, I remembered that when you brought that question up. And yeah, a lot of parents don't think it's important to teach children how to make a choice. So yeah, thank
And
you.
again, Farah, that comes down to, again, when I said validate that younger version of yourself, it comes down to a lot of what we've experienced of not being able to make choices for ourselves. So it's unconsciously, it's that pattern of, well, I didn't get a choice, therefore you will not get a choice. And I know it sounds so horrible right now, but unconsciously, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
It is. You're right. You're right. And we do that a lot. In fact, we don't even realize we're doing it. I have become a lot more conscious now, because I'm not going to say I don't do any of those things. I'm still a
Yes,
work in
yes,
progress. I openly admit
yes.
that, but I'm able to immediately pick on the times, and I have no problem apologizing to my children when I do that.
And that's so beautiful though, mashallah, because I think for us as black mothers or brown mothers, we're so harsh on ourselves as well. And what you just said there, the fact that you apologize, we apologize to our children, that is breaking one cycle within itself, because so many of us grew up not having an apology. So you've already broken a massive cycle there. So we need to be easy on ourselves, because we're still learning, we're still unlearning, and we will always be a work in progress. So it's about being aware, being conscious, but also giving yourself grace at the same time, because you're learning and growing as much as your children are.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I think there is so much to unpack here. There's so much to sit back and think about, that I think we're good with what we have accomplished so far. So just off the record, I'm going to edit this part, Maryam, but is there something that you think that special needs community parents should know as well, that I might not have asked you?
I think, you know what, Farah, I think within I have this conversation quite a lot with my community, because I have a lot of mothers who have neurodiverse children. I think there is a great need for education within our ethnic communities when it comes to neurodiverse children. I've heard some terrible things, I kid you not. Like, I have family members who have neurodiverse children. I have firsthand seen mothers stopping their children from stimming because they're worried that what are people going to say? Why
Yeah.
can't he sit still? And I firsthand saw this very recently in a wedding, and it really broke me, because although it's not my field of expertise, I know when a child is suffocating themselves because they really want to stim, but because their mother is sitting next to them and she's so, and I'm not saying this in a shaming way, but there needs to be more education within our ethnic communities surrounding why they do those type of things and what their actual needs are. And it's not that they're just messing around, they can't sit still and they're terrible children. It's a need that they have, and to give mothers that education. And I think that's very important. I think there's a missing chunk of education.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, I think for a lot of ethnic mums I have come across, is also just accepting the fact that they have a neurodiverse child, and there's no shame in that. They haven't done anything wrong. It's nothing they ate in pregnancy. It's not a curse. I know it sounds so ridiculous, but these are things that I've heard. And I think, so ultimately, I would say there needs to be more education, perhaps more support for ethnic mothers within our communities who have neurodiverse children. Because let's be real, it's the same with conscious parenting. You and I still have to go to family gatherings. You and I still have to do all of those things. And a lot of our elders, may Allah bless them, they don't understand. They don't understand that stuff. So if you're not empowered within yourself and you're not confident and you don't know your child and you don't know how to help them yourself, anything anyone says to you, of course you're going to crumble. Of course you're going to think, oh my gosh, Allah has done this to me, and you're going to think all of these things. So education, I would say education, and for them to just feel empowered and know that they can have the tools to be equipped to know how to help their child.
You're right. It all starts with you. It all starts with also your body language. I find a lot of moms apologetic, and you can see it in their body language, right? Their shoulders will be caved in. They'll be so apologetic that they have a neurodivergent child. And because I was one of those moms, and I had to really question myself that what am I sorry about? It's pretty obvious that this child has needs. And if there is a mom who's coming and complaining about him, I have to keep my emotions in check and explain to the mom that he does have a problem. And usually moms are very understanding. If my demeanor is okay, if my demeanor is welcoming, and that I'm open to listening to your questions or listening to whatever you need to say about my child, if my body language says it, they're happy to engage and talk. But if I become defensive and, become aggressive, and that's where I feel a lot of mothers have a problem. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's really important. I think it's really important.
That's really nice. I don't know why I forgot to bring that up, because that is major thing moms call me for, and they're like, our child is stimming all the time, we can't take them out and this and that. I'm like, well, take him to a place where he's comfortable and you're comfortable. Tell the people, whoever's homes you're going to, that I have a child with these needs, and can I make some accommodations for my child? I do that.
Yeah, but you know what it is, Farah? Also, I think it's a lot of us didn't grow up. We don't know how to advocate for ourselves, let alone our children. We don't know how to.
It all comes down to that.
Yeah, that's what it is, and it's we think we're being disruptive and a burden if we hey, can we not go to this restaurant? Can we go here? So I think it's what you said is very important. It starts with us. If we're confident and we're empowered in our role as parents, be it with neurodiverse children or just children in general, I think people pick up on that and they're more receptive to it, and then they're more open to having that conversation surrounding educating them about what neurodiversity and what that means and why your particular child is doing that. That's what I think is missing. I think that's really missing, and it really does start from us. It starts from us.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yes, sorry, the last bit you mentioned, can you repeat the last bit? Sorry. Do you remember what was the last bit you told me? Because I had a thought when you said that, and then I got distracted like this.
I said to start off, and I think the last thing I said was it starts from us. I said, so if we're empowered and we're confident, people are more receptive to having that conversation and more receptive to being educated on what neurodiversity is. Whereas if we're more apologetic and we're, embarrassed, because that's how mothers feel. You feel embarrassed, you feel apologetic for having a child like this.
And then nobody wants to talk to you about it because they don't want to hurt you. They don't want to offend you. So they don't ask. But if you show that you're open to discussing everything and anything about your child, you invite healthy conversations.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's needed, those healthy conversations of mothers who have neurodiverse children, to be able to have those conversations with other mothers, because mothers, mashallah, we're very receptive. Most mothers are very receptive and understanding. And I think this is what we need inside our communities, to whether or not you've got neurodiverse children. I don't have neurodiverse children, but I know that I'm surrounded by many. So we homeschool. So when we go to groups, and there's many, and we all need to know it's important for all of us, not just people who have neurodiverse children, because then when we have the tools, when we have the education, we can also explain to our children, hey, this child is stimming and this is something they need to do, and it's a need for them, and they're not just, moving around for no reason. That's important for our children to know that as well.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think the reason why that happens, Maryam, and yes, I just remembered this clearly, is because when I found out that my child was on the spectrum, when his diagnosis came out, the first thing that came to my mind is how I can help him. It's not about how I
Mm.
can empower myself to help him. How can I take care of myself in this whole
Yes,
process? And that's when you say educating ourselves about taking care of our needs too. Because
yes,
for us, when
yes.
we get a diagnosis, and I think I speak for all moms here, when we find out that our child is on the spectrum, it's like literally giving us a death sentence for our child. It is for a lot of moms, it's shattering. And
Mm.
we feel that because we have dreamt up a life for our child.
Yes,
In
yes,
our, in our, I mean, our child is born, but in our minds, he's already getting married and
yes.
he or she's having children and, living that life. But so when you get that diagnosis, it's over. You see all of that being shattered. So there's nobody there to help you through that grief. And you are,
Power.
yeah,
Important.
it is grief, it's trauma, whatever you want to call it, but it's there. And without seeking help for ourselves, we straight away go into let me fix my child mode.
Yes, yes. That is so important, Farah, because it's what you're explaining essentially is the snapshot of the child we thought we would have, the talking, the walking, because I know with some neurodiverse children, they can completely non-verbal. And it's that shattering of, will I ever be able to hear my child speak? Will they ever talk? And that shattering of the child you thought you were going to have, and maybe the one that you dreamt of, and then the child that Allah has blessed you with, and that space, that grief and that space. And I think a lot of mothers may even feel shame for saying that there is that element of grief, because shouldn't I be grateful that Allah has just given me a child? So having that support I can imagine would probably be priceless.
Yes. Yes, inshallah. And that's what the aim is with coming out and speaking to mashallah parents like yourselves who are able to bring these topics up and talk about it so openly. So thank you so much, Maryam, for this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure we could sit here for hours and hours,
I
but
know. I know, inshallah soon. I'm sure I have so many things to think about and so many things, so many questions that are coming to my mind, and we definitely need to do this again.